The typical clothing of an African American in the Mississippi Delta in the late 1800s was very modest, with things such as like the overalls, blue jeans, and like a straw hat. The reason they wore these kind of things is because they were sharecroppers and tenant farmers, and their lifestyles were very poor, so their clothing reflected what their lifestyle was. More popular artists, such as Leadbelly, would wear nicer suits with bow ties, and that was just because he made it out of being a tenant farmer, so he had the opportunity to have a little bit more money and more nicer things. Um, like overall clothing in the 1900s was still not like very showy, so that's why ragtime coming later on was a big thing because not a lot of skin was shown, but blues kind of stayed with that. But artists such as Mamie Smith coming later on wore more scandalous, you could say, things with more showing dresses. But overall, the clothing for African Americans in Mississippi Delta was not very showy and was kind of porous, which reflected their lifestyle.
After the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, slavery was outlawed in the South. However, segregation still existed, and racial tensions were high in the era of Jim Crow laws. African Americans still worked for whites after they were freed. After a hard week of work, African Americans would gamble and drink during the day while enjoying barbecue with their children. At night, the adults would head to juke joints, also known as barrel houses or honky-tonks, to let off some steam from the work week and enjoy an evening of entertainment. Juke joints were similar to social clubs because they featured dancing, drinking, gambling, and music, which is how early musicians spread the blues.
Jobs for African Americans in the Mississippi Delta during the late 1800s included sharecropping, building railroads, and playing music. Sharecropping is a system where the planter allows a tenant to use the land in exchange for a share of the crops. This began as planters recruited freedmen from around the South with promises of good pay and working conditions. In the best situations, African Americans were able to negotiate labor contracts, which led to higher wages and a larger percentage of crop shares. This enabled some to purchase tracts of woodlands and began clearing their own land while working on nearby plantations. If they were lucky, they eventually became independent farm owners. In fact, by 1900, 2/3 of the farm owners in the Mississippi Delta were black. However, many remained landless laborers going from plantation to pick cotton. Another opportunity for African Americans to gain employment came from the burst in railroad construction in and around the Mississippi Delta. In 1880, there were no railroads in and around the Mississippi Delta, but by 1903, that number had jumped to 816 miles of railway. Although this was strenuous work, it provided a means for African Americans to support their families. Lastly, during this time period, African Americans were developing musical forms of blues and jazz. The poverty and hardship that often plagued their lives led to emotional expression through music. Work songs and field hollers gradually developed into the beat, rhythm, and songs that swept through the Mississippi Delta and across the nation.
Diddley bows were important among country bluesmen because this was the instrument that many of them got their start on. This instrument was rather cheap to construct and easy to transport. The cheap and easy component of this instrument is what made it so popular among country bluesmen. It was also popular because in the beginning days of the instrument, there was no set standard for it. There was no plans, so a poor artist could construct a completely unique diddley bow to sing the blues with.
Our fiddly bow has a pretty simple construction here with just a 2x4, then 2 screws screwed into it with a guitar string and a Snapple bottle right there in the middle. So to play the fiddly bow, all you do is grab your little bottle here and strum your string and move your bottle back and forth for different pitches.